Thank you so much for joining us today for our fourth webinar in our six-part series titled Least Restrictive Environment. My name is Kelly Carnahan, and I will be hosting this webinar along with my colleague Susie Lund. We are the training coordinators here at Ask. Before we get started, I want to share a little bit about Ask. Ask is a nonprofit resource center in Iowa that is here to support families, professionals, and people with disabilities. We have our values that are posted up on our word bubbles here. They are passion and fearlessness, individualized attention, integrity, excellence and stewardship, unyielding commitment, and a collective impact. So, IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is a federal law, excuse me, created rules and guidelines for special education. The law gives eligible children with disabilities rights to specially designed instruction and individualized services and supports that they need to benefit from public education. IDEA has 6 foundational principles, which are outlined below. We have covered the first 3 already, but today we are focusing on least restrictive environment. Susie just also dropped in the chat a resource for you all that is one of our info sheets that helps highlight all of these principles for you. So first, we're going to do a little bit of a review for the first few principles that we have covered. So principle number 1 is FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education. And we learned that every student in special education has a right to FAPE. Appropriate public education is as we went into great detail describing the complexities of FAPE in our first webinar. One important aspect of FAPE is the IEP team, including the parents, that creates a unique learning plan for the child to allow them to be involved and make progress in Iowa academic standards. We compared this design to the right vehicle to move forward on the Iowa academic standards. In order to create this unique plan, an appropriate and accurate evaluation is needed. One important aspect of FAPE is public, the P in FAPE. There are a few different aspects of public. First, it is aligned to the Iowa academic standards, and it is aligned to post-secondary education standards. You can see this on our graphic with the Iowa Road and the school building. The other aspect of public is access to peers. Students with an IEP should have as much participation with same-age peers as possible. They also should attend the school that they are assigned to if they were non-disabled. In our graphic, you see this with the playground with children on it, and also the school building, again, to signal where they should be. Principle number 2 was appropriate evaluation. An appropriate evaluation serves 3 purposes: to see if the child is a child with a disability and requires special education. It is used to gather information to determine the child's needs at the beginning. This is our bus stop in the FAPE graphic. And to guide decisions about appropriate programming. The third principle we talked about was an IEP. An IEP serves for 3 things. It is a written statement for the child with a disability. It is designed to support meaningful progress in education. And it serves as a roadmap to ensure the student is receiving the best supports possible, or the most supports possible, to help them continue on their progress through school. We talked about the steps in developing an IEP last week. The first one is identify the present levels of performance. Next, you establish annual goals. This can both be in academics and in life skills. Third is to plan for progress monitoring, or how to check to see if the child is making progress. The fourth step is to decide services that the child needs in order to be successful. And then the last step is identifying least restrictive environment. And this is where we will be spending a lot of today on, is digging into least restrictive environment and what that means for children with IEPs. So today, by the end of this webinar, you will be able to, or you will explore how and why LRE became a key part of special education law. You will understand what LRE means under IDEA, and you will learn how an IEP teams make placement decisions. So I'm going to pass it off to Susie and she's going to start walking you through these objectives.
Thank you, Kelly. Excuse my voice today. I'm going to be as clear as possible. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on least restrictive environment. The first objective that I'm going to talk about today is to explore how and why LRE became a key part of special education law. So before we talk about that, let's just do a little brief history. Before 1975, many children with disabilities could not attend school at all. And families really had no say in their child's education. Some children were taught in separate classes or institutions, but there was really no general sense of where kids with disabilities could go to school. It really depended on where people lived in the United States. But what happened was parents made a huge difference. They formed advocacy groups. They filed lawsuits to demand that there's equal rights. They met with lawmakers and shared stories. They partnered with educators to create solutions. And they refused to accept that their children didn't belong at school. They organized and they spoke up and they took action. So these efforts led to Congress passing the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which has turned into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. Now, LRE has been included in the original version of this act. And one piece of LRE is lawmakers really wanted to end, and parents wanted to end segregation of students with disabilities. And they looked to both civil rights movement that was really at that time and research showing the benefits of kids with disabilities learning alongside peers without disabilities. So why does it matter? Why does LRE matter? There are quite a few benefits of children with disabilities being educated among peers. A few of them are they're able to build friendships with kids without disabilities. It encourages that range of all kinds of different people are going to school, and we're going to accept those people. Um, it really promotes higher expectations and achievement when there's some peer role models and when kids are included together. And it prepares students for life in society. I mean, there is no special education once you graduate from high school. So we really have to think about how are we going to be living, learning, and working in society. So the main thing to point out about this objective is that parents really made a huge difference here. Um, and they wanted to make sure that they knew that their children were valued members of our community, and they fought to make sure that they had the right to attend school alongside their peers whenever possible. So let's talk about that next objective. We're going to understand what does least restrictive environment mean under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So first, I'm just going to read what it says in the IDEA. And the emphasis has been added by us because we're going to talk really about a lot of these things that are that are bolded. First, to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled, and special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the general education environment occurs, and here's emphasis added, only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. The law goes on to say, a child with a disability shall not be removed from education in age-appropriate regular classrooms solely because of needed modifications in the general education curriculum. So let's break that down. Let's think a little bit about what it is that means, and we're gonna talk about each aspect of that definition. In plain language, students with disabilities should learn with peers as much as possible, with peers without disabilities as much as possible. Separate settings are used only when it's needed, and students can't be removed from the general education just because they need modifications. Additionally, students with disabilities should learn alongside peers as much as possible with the supports and services they need. Now, that emphasis was also added by us. Just being in the room is not enough to achieve LRE, that children need to be able to meaningfully participate. General education is the least restrictive environment when a child can learn and make progress there with the right supports. But if a child cannot learn effectively in that setting, even with help, then the education classroom may not be the LRE. That's why the least restrictive environment is decided last. Because those first webinars we've done, we've talked about what does the student need to learn, what supports or services need to happen in order to learn it. And then the last thing is in what setting can the student learn best with these supports? So that's how we kind of think about least restrictive environment. So, key terms to really point out within those definitions is the continuum of alternative services and placements, and then supplementary aids and services. We're going to talk about each one of those. So, the law requires the continuum of alternative services and placements be available. This means districts must have a range of options from support in the general education to special classes, special schools, home instruction, or instruction in hospitals and institutions. Now, the law does not require that every individual school building offers every single placement option. Every district needs to have access to the full continuum, either within the district or through partnerships with other districts or agencies. And the continuum is for students from 3 to the age of 21 who are qualifying for special education. Now, however, this part is really important. If the IEP team determines that the school needs a type of service or placement that isn't currently available in that school, the district must find it or create it. Saying we don't have that is not an acceptable response under the IDEA. This is why IEP teams really need to be flexible and creative when designing services. Schools must figure out how to provide what the student needs, not be limited to options that are already in place. So in Iowa, this is defined as a district developed service delivery plan. Every school district is required to have this written plan that outlines how it will provide special education and related services to eligible students. So, what is this district developed service delivery plan? Kelly's going to be dropping a little information in the chat that will give you some additional information about this from the Iowa Department of Education. The DDSDP describes that range of services that are available for students. For example, support within a general education classroom, small group instruction, or specialized sorts of settings. Some districts have their district developed service delivery plan on their website. It could also be called a special education service delivery plan. But you can also ask to see what is your district's service delivery plan so that you can better understand what services are in your district. I'm just going to talk a little bit about an example because if you go to the Iowa Department of Education site that Kelly has dropped in the chat, then you will see that there's some examples that the DE has offered. And this is just one example of one of some different services that a district could offer. So consulting teacher services, co-teaching services, collaborative services, pull-out services, or special class. I'm not going to go into great detail about the descriptions of each of these services because what the really purposes of today is talking about that each district it needs to spend some time thinking about what are the range of services that you offer in your district. Um, but the important note is that students may receive different services at multiple points along this continuum. So there may be a child in general education with some consulting from a special education teacher, and they might have pull-out services at times. There might be some co-teaching at time throughout their day. So it really is just kind of this rubber band of this big ball of rubber bands all put together to ensure that we have the right services in place for the child. Okay, so we've talked about that continuum of alternative services and placements and how you can find that in your district in Iowa. Now, let's talk about supplementary aids and services. Recall in the definition of in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, I'm not going to read the whole definition again, but I have highlighted and bolded that the part about that they must be, that separate schooling or other removal of children with disabilities from general education occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So let's talk about what is this supplementary aids and services. The IDEA doesn't go into great detail about what that means. And so over the course of, since the law was passed, that's been defined in a number of ways. So it means it's supports provided to a student or the school staff to help the children learn or and that will enable the child to be educated with non-disabled children to the maximum extent appropriate. So you can see sometimes it's direct services for the actual student, but it could be for the team who doesn't really know what is the kind of education that this child needs. They might need some help, that school team. So it's both. So we've got our cute little guy that we've had on each one of our webinars so far. What does that mean? What does it mean to have supplementary aids and services? So these are some examples of supplementary aids and services, accommodations, modifications, direct services and supports, or support and training for staff, if we're speaking practically, as the slide is labeled. And then here's some examples from the field. There could be some supports to address environmental needs. We talked a lot about these accommodations last week in our IEP webinar, but this would be something like, where does the child need to sit in the classroom? How does the classroom need to be arranged for that child? Maybe there needs to be some planning time for that team to work together to make sure that they've got everything in place. There could be some specialized equipment involved. They might need to think about how the pacing of instruction needs to happen. There may be some adaptations to the presentation. Maybe the child needs auditory texts or braille or some other way to have the information. We could need testing adaptations. It could be that there's social interaction support. Some of our kids just have a real difficult time around in social situations. Maybe they need some help there. And then lastly, that training for school personnel. These are, like I said, not a exhaustive list. And thank you, Kelly. She has dropped in the chat. This is an article from our Parent Center Hub that goes into a little more detail about some different accommodations. So now I'm going to introduce you quickly to this. There's a picture of Tyler Green. And I actually was friends with Tyler Green when I lived in Waterloo. He was a powerful self-advocate and a former Waterloo Community School student. He's a proud graduate of the University of Northern Iowa. He was not only an advocate for himself, but for all students with disabilities. His story has been shared widely by many people to better understand his concept of ability awareness, which is what this video is called, if this video features. Tyler created this video you're about to see as part of his Eagle Scout project. We're just going to watch a little clip of it where he talks about the supplementary supports and services he received in high school and how those supports helped him to succeed. Although Tyler has since passed away, his message continues to inspire many students and educators and families across Iowa. So I'm going to show you just a little bit from Tyler's video of the supports that he used in high school.
I love high school, but sometimes it's hard. My cerebral palsy and nonverbal learning disorder make a lot of things in class difficult, but my teachers are wonderful. My aide and the administrators are too. They work with me to accommodate my challenges and keep them from being obstacles. They enlarge handouts, revise assignments, adapt testing, see before I can see better, and generally find different ways of getting at the same result. They keep open minds, and together we have a lot of creativity. Yeah, sometimes they find these new ways to be better for the whole class.
All right. And I love the ending of that video that he says sometimes they find ways that are better for the whole class. And often that can happen, that if a teacher can find that it really works for one kid, sometimes it works for many. So thank you for letting us share that quick snippet of a video of Tyler. So our last objective today is to learn how IEP teams make placement decisions. How do we go about making these decisions? Okay, so the key rules is the decision needs to be made at least annually. So when you go to that annual review at the IEP meeting, each year you revisit where is the least restrictive environment in order for all these supports to be in place for this child. It's based on the child's IEP. We're going to look, that's why we've gone along with all of these principles. We've talked about first, what does the child need? And what do those services look like? So now we decide where they will take place. It's also the school needs to be as close as possible to the child's home, and usually the same school that the child would attend if not disabled. That is a real preference that the child goes to the school that they would attend if not disabled. Now, IEP teams can make decisions like we've talked about before for a more restrictive setting, but the preference is that they would attend the school the child would attend if not disabled. Who makes this decision? You as the parent are a huge part of this decision. The team includes parents, other people who know the child, people who understand their data, and members who know the placement options. Often this is the IEP team, but these are the members of that. This was the team that was defined within the IDEA. So together, the team decides the least restrictive setting that meets the child's needs. In our next webinar, we're going to take a closer look at what the word together really means. We're going to focus on student and parent participation and how your voice as a part of the IEP meeting is really important, including making that decision about the LRE. So, what are some guiding questions that teams can consider for placement? The Iowa Administrative Code goes into more detail about some questions that you could consider when thinking about least restrictive environment. The team will consider what supports will help the child succeed in general education. What do they need when they're in general education? And then why can't those supports be provided in that setting? Sometimes there's such a complicated mix of supports that they may be difficult to provide in a general education setting, but it's important to consider why they couldn't be. And then what supports do teachers need? Sometimes one thing that I like to say is the reason why these decisions are a team decision is because nobody can know every single detail about the needs of a kid especially who's more complex. So thinking about something specific that the child needs, sometimes the teachers might need a little help understanding how that works also. And then how will being in the general education environment impact that child? And then lastly, how will it impact other students? So if you really consider all these things, then the team can think about the best environment for that student. And remember, like the least restrictive environment really depends on what the child needs. And then we're going to make a decision about where that is at the very end. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Kelly, who's going to talk about our quiz.
First question is, what does LRE, or least restrictive environment, mean? And for this one, we have B. Students with disabilities learn alongside peers as much as possible with the supports that they need. So the next one, according to IDEA, When can a student with a disability be placed in a separate setting? This one is answer C, only if their needs cannot be met satisfactorily in the regular classroom or general education classroom with supports. So this is when those placement changes could happen. Can a student be removed from the general education setting solely because they need modifications? This answer is no. This is highlighted directly in IDEA code that we presented at the beginning. Just because modifications are needed does not mean they need to be removed from the classroom. Question number 4. Which of the following is an example of a supplementary aid or service? This one is extra time on tests. So this is what are some additional things they may need to help support them? I do remember I saw someone select lowering the academic expectations, and that would be a different type of change because we are changing what they need, not adding supports to help them learn there. But I understand where you come from that. These can be a little confusing. Okay, next one. Question number 5. Which of the following is a benefit of educating students together with the right supports? And the answer to this one is B. It builds friendships, promotes acceptance, and prepares students for adult life. And then our last question, which of the following is a true statement about LRE? And it is LRE requires finding the right mix of environment and supports for each child. So LRE, just to summarize it all up, is a balance. Key message you should take away, LRE is not one size fit all. It is truly to what the student needs. It is about finding the right mix of environments and support for each child. So takeaways for our parents and our professionals here. Remember, you are an equal member of the child's IEP team. Parents have a say, and to our professionals, please remember to take in their input. They are an expert on their child. Parents, ask questions, share observations, and help find the best fit for your child. You know them better than anybody, so don't hesitate to share what you know. And lastly, LRE is about making sure every child belongs and can succeed. So objectives, just what we covered today. We explored how and why LRE became a big part of special education law thanks to our parents. We understand what LRE means under IDEA, and we learned about how IEP teams make placement decisions. These are our references. We used a lot for this one, so you can have all of these to see how we dug in deeper to this topic. Just a few additional resources if you have missed our first few webinars around the 6 principles of IDEA. The FAPE and appropriate evaluation is already on YouTube and linked here. The IEP one should be coming here soon. And then Q&A. So we've had a couple come in, Susie. So the first one. Are schools required to provide families with information regarding the options that are available across the placement continuum? So the DDSDP. I did answer this and said families can ask for their district's plans and ask questions around it. Is there anything else you would like to add to this?
I think that's how I would say it too, Kelly, that now that you all know that districts do need to have this district developed service delivery plan, districts are not required to share that as part of an IEP meeting, but it is something to make sure to consider as you're looking at services and thinking about how do we best serve the child when you're making that decision.
Thank you. Another one, if a change in placement is needed to take place, what necessary steps must the IEP team make to make this shift?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think when you start talking about services at the end of your IEP meeting, you're going to talk about the number of minutes that a child needs to be served for, let's just do an example, maybe specially designed instruction in math. This is kind of an easier example. So there may be some pull-out instruction that happens in a small group setting that really focuses on some skills that the child needs to work on. And then there could also be some co-teaching sorts of services where the special ed teacher goes into the general education classroom and helps with instruction there. So on that services page, it will show how many minutes are happening in a removed setting and how many minutes are in a general education setting. And then there are questions in the IEP that say, where does that take place and why? So a rationale needs to be listed on the IEP of if a child is removed, why is that happening? So the parent is involved in that in those conversations.
Yes, and if you don't mind, I would also like to add data from previous IEPs, and that progress monitoring is going to be a huge support in making that decision. When it's academics, we could see if we're not making progress with co-teaching, we look at the graph and that aim line is not, or that trend line is not matching with that aim line. It may be time to consider something different. And the considerations could be a lot of things. When it comes to behavior, we need to look at a lot of things, but the information from the BIP, the data from their progress monitoring will help be a big help in making those decisions. Then we have, does LRE apply to physical education? Does the district develop service plans to apply to physical education? And somebody else echoed this, saying, I'm interested in this physical education question. I find there is sometimes confusion between adaptive PE and PT, especially in preschool and early elementary.
Okay, those are some good questions. Well, first of all, LRE is needs to be considered all throughout the day, and so it could be considered as part of special as part of physical education. Um, there are some adaptations to physical education that I have not read for a while, so I'm not versed in being able to tell you exactly what they are, but there are some PE. You can have physical education with accommodations. You might need adapted PE where things are adapted specifically for that child, and all of those are IEP team decisions. And then the other one was about was it about physical therapy, Kelly? I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
was looking at
confusion
something.
between adaptive PE versus PT, especially in preschool levels. Does each school district have a qualifications for adaptive PE?
There are adaptive PE is actually outlined pretty clearly on the I3, the Iowa Department of Education Special Education resource. So you can look about adaptive PE. So I can say that it really sort of depends where you are. There are some districts that have more of a program sort of an idea, where others, I do know that every PE teacher needs to also take adaptive PE. So they are able to make adaptations to physical education. When it comes to physical therapy, that's different. That is a service that that is the service on the child's IEP, then that means that there's a physical therapist who's overseeing that service. So they're the ones who are making sure that it's written correctly on the IEP. They're overseeing that. They may have an assistant who supports the services that they're requiring within the IEP, but that's an actual physical therapist who's involved.
Thank you. And I did put in the chat, some of these questions really do depend on the child, the school district, all of these considerations. So if you would like to talk to one of our staff personally about the situation you are experiencing, please use that contact us tab so we can help answer your questions a little more specifically than we can in this type of setting. So we have also, what can a parent do if they disagree about the proposed LRE?
That's a really good question. First of all, if there's a disagreement about the least restrictive environment, you'd want to make sure that your concerns are outlined pretty clearly on the prior written notice. We are going to have a webinar on prior written notice, but the prior written notice is that document that you get at the end of an IEP meeting that documents what services were proposed, what services were also rejected and why they were rejected. And you want to really clearly have it on there that you disagreed with that statement as a parent. Once you've got that prior written notice, then there are several levels of dispute resolution that you would be able to, that we can offer. We have some different resources at Ask. And we can also, like Kelly said, if that's something that you're really wanting to know more about, I would look at the resources that, oh, Kelly's dropping the resource about adaptive PE in the chat. Thank you, Kelly. About dispute resolution options. We always encourage the lowest level at an IEP meeting and really collecting your own data of why you think it's more important for these services to be in a less restrictive or more restrictive setting. I know I've known parents that have advocated for both a least restrictive or a more restrictive. So thinking about your own data of what you know about your child that could support your cause is a really important piece to bring to the table.
With that resource I did drop in, this is actually a great resource for all the components of within an IEP and the understanding Iowa has around them. But if you scroll down a little bit and click on the tab that's physical education, it will help provide a little more definitions of what general physical education is, modified physical education, and specially designed physical education could be. We have a question from Holly. Is there a limit to how many children receiving services can be in one co-taught class?
Okay, the reason why I got a little distracted during one of those questions is because there is a reference, there is a webinar from the Iowa Department of Education that specifically talks about least restrictive environment. And that was a question that was given to in that webinar. And so I wanted to make sure that I answer it correctly. And so the percentage piece of like when it becomes a special education environment versus a general education environment really only applies to preschool. And so I'm trying to find it. Okay, so if a class is open to all students, it's considered a general education setting. 80% of students, if 80% of students have an IEP, it is still a general education setting. If that group is open to all students, that's the key. Now, if it's a preschool student, it's about the makeup of the class. So it's 51% or more of students have an IEP in preschool, it's considered a special education setting.
Thank you. And I also just noticed Alicia is another staff member from Ask, helping us out being here today, and she dropped in another resource from Iowa Education around guidance for for physical education for students with disabilities. So thank you for that, Alicia. Um, should someone from my child's IEP team be able to describe options in the district's continuum of alternative placements, services and placements?
I would probably go directly to the administrator to be able to describe the different placements on the continuum. And then also, if you go to the Iowa Department of Education website, all of those settings are described. So if you're able to get a copy of the district developed service delivery plan, all of those placements are described within that plan.
A question we have from Elizabeth is teachers can also receive, oh, sorry, I think this is a statement, sorry. Teachers can also receive specific training based on their students' needs, such as having a blind student in their class. This training can be provided as professional development by the district. Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Elizabeth. There is part of within the services and supports, there's support for school personnel, and that is where that can be added in to make sure teachers are receiving training to help their students the best. Is there anything else you would like to add to that, Susie?
No, I think that that's just a great consideration. I know that when I was in schools, there were behavior intervention plans that were pretty complicated and complex. And so we would have some specific training on what is it, how do we follow this to the best of our ability?
And then a question, is it legal for a district to address LRE by saying, we're inclusive, all education takes place in Gen Ed?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. First of all, before I move into answering it from my perspective, we want to make sure we underline and ask. We are not lawyers, and when we get questions of is this legal, our answer is these are some options, or this is a resource that you could look at to learn more about what your question is. So I think that if we think about if someone says we're inclusive and all education takes place in general education, we know that there needs to be a continuum of settings. That general education would be amazing if every child was able to learn there and succeed and grow because we know that there's a lot of benefits. However, there are some times that a child needs a more restrictive setting. And we've gone through quite a few ideas within this webinar of reasons why you might want a more restrictive setting. And then also understanding that this doesn't mean that this restrictive setting means for the rest of the child's life. It means right now, this is the best setting for the child at this moment.
Thank you. Another good question that has just come in from Holly. Is a chair in the hallway considered a special education environment for pull-out minutes?
That is a good question, Holly, because if I were to go back to what I learned before is that if it's open to all students, then it would be considered a general education setting. Now, if it is specially designed instruction in the hallway with a special education teacher, would say that that probably is considered a special education setting. I know schools sometimes have to be creative about where those services take place, depending on what's available within the school building. So I would really focus in on what is the content being taught and is it specially designed. But that to me would be a pull-out setting.
If more questions come, we can spend some time, we can go back to answering them. We still have time, but I just want to make sure for the sake of everybody, I want to respect your time. We're just going to do our few little wrap-up slides that we have here. Sneak peek. Next week, we're going on principle number 5, which is parent and student participation in the IEP meeting. This is a really large one for families and students that want to or should be involved in their IEP. So we hope to see you next week for that. Also, we're coming to the end here. Only have 2 more left in this series. Next week's parent and student participation, and then procedural safeguards. We'll have a week in between those. And then we will have one more at the end of December around progress monitoring. And then this is just our survey. If you could please fill this out for us. This is a great way to ensure we are still receiving funding, but then there is a place to tell us what you want to see from Ask. We want to make sure we are addressing your questions as families and professionals in the field. You deserve to have all of these questions answered. Yes, this will be recorded. And yes, the past sessions are on our YouTube page. If you go to
Sure.
youtube.com/askresource, you can find those. And when this PowerPoint comes out, the first 2 will be linked. We're waiting on the third one to be almost ready. It should be ready here by the end of this week. But thank you so much for being here. Connect with us if you have any questions. I put that contact request form in the chat before. Just click to talk to a family support specialist, and one of our staff should be with you within a few business days to help talk to you about your questions. We do have an office in Johnston, but it is not readily staffed, so the best way to get a hold of us is through our website or through these 2 phone numbers on the screen. With the phone numbers, please just leave a voicemail. Our phones are always ringing, so it's hard to answer them all. So a voicemail will get you on our intake list. Here is our website and our email, or an email if you have any more questions. Follow us on Facebook to keep up to date with all things Ask and anything disability related. And here is our YouTube page again, youtube.com/Ask Resource Center. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm so happy you enjoyed the session, and we hope to see you all next week for principle number 5. Have a great week, everybody.